Hello and welcome. My name is Zaffar Iqbal, and you are watching the Mojo Story. Now, an important turn in the Russia-Ukraine war. Russia has announced its decision to pull out troops from Kherson. This is reportedly due to difficulty of maintaining supply lines for its troops. Meanwhile, the US has reportedly said that over 1 lakh Russian soldiers have been killed or injured since the war began last year. The Ukraine has said that negotiations with Russia can begin only if Russia vacates all the areas it has occupied in Ukraine. Now, Kherson is among the four provinces that Russian President Vladimir Putin had claimed to have annexed as being part of Russia. Meanwhile, the war has not ended. The US has announced further $400 million security package for Ukraine. Ukraine troops have entered Kherson province now after the Russians left. We joined by an eminent panel to discuss this. We joined by Major General Dhruv Katoch. We joined by Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, Major General Dhruv Katoch from the India Foundation. Joining us also is Bhuvan Bagga, South Asian correspondent for AFP. We are also joined by Dr. Tara Kartha, former director, NSCS. We're also we joined by all those eminent panelists to discuss this issue. If I come to you first, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, how do you see this retreat, a major victory by the Ukraine or a defeat for Russia?
Well, greetings. This is a spectacular loss for Russia if what we see is actually happening. And the reason I'll come to that in a minute. Uh, Inability of Russia to hold on to Kherson bodes ill for them. Earlier, they lost Kharkiv, but Kherson is a gateway to Crimea, and its occupation in March 2022 was declared as a big victory. It is
Yeah,
strategically placed. It is a gateway to Crimea, as I said. It is also gives access to Odessa and Black Sea ports.
yeah,
Now, unless this is some kind of a ruse, some kind of a tactical withdrawal, some kind of a sham
yeah,
withdrawal, meant to suck in the Ukrainian troops and then go for inflict some damage on them, because even today Russia has the capability of going on for an all-out attack through or the aerial attack they can launch. But
yeah,
whatever that be, this is not how the script was supposed to go.
yeah,
The special operation was to last a few days or a couple of weeks. It's the ninth month, and
yeah,
Russia is facing one setback after the other. Now only Donetsk and Luhansk are left, and only a matter of time before pressure is applied for them. It is something that was not expected, and something which does not mean it bodes ill generally for the whole scenario in the region.
exactly. And Tara Kartha, what's the sense you get? What could have been the possible Russian goals? Nobody understands. Initially, it was thought that war would last for a few days or perhaps a few weeks. Now it's continued for months altogether, and there seems to be no victory in sight for Russia. In fact, it's losing whatever it had gained or consolidated in the beginning.
At the moment, whether, like as the ambassador said correctly, it's too early to say whether they're losing, right? Because right now,
Yeah,
what they're doing is taking a defensible position along the river. So now winter's coming, they're kind of digging in. Everybody's digging in into their respective
yeah,
positions. This could also, my idea is that that is what they wanted the Donbas region, loosely called the Donbas region, initially itself. That was the goal.
yeah, yeah,
They went beyond that into surrounding Kyiv and things, which I think the goals kept shifting. So that
yeah,
is where, from the beginning, though initially, now I've just read a study from an excellent study, which does say that the Russian air attacks were far more successful than initially thought. But then the thing is, the fact that taking out air defense, especially if it's mobile, in any
Yeah,
scenario is difficult. I mean, you remember the Iraq war. If you remember the hunt for the Scuds, you remember how difficult it
yeah,
was. And you had actually, how was it won? Because there were special forces on the ground. They went and hit those characters. It's a very difficult task to get. And
yeah.
in this, you have a limited area. But you're right. There's no doubt that the Russians seem to have overreached beyond what the original goals we assume were. And right now, my sense is that everyone's going to just dig in for the winter, and then let's see what happens.
Yes, the winter is very crucial, particularly in that part of the world. Major General Dhruv Katoch, purely from the point of view of military, what's the sense that you get that Russia has pull out from this area?
Right. Zaffar, let me put it this way. They haven't pulled out from Kherson. They have pulled out from the Kherson township only.
Yeah,
Now,
yes,
once
yes.
we
That's a,
understand that, the
yeah,
Kherson township is on the western bank of the Dnipro River, or the northern bank. It's on the other side. Now, for the Russians to have maintained a place like this involves fighting in a built up area over a long period of time. And when winter sets in, this fighting will become very difficult for the Russian troops, which are located inside. In my view, they have taken a conscious decision to get back to the other side of the Dnipro River, that is the eastern side, which they will continue to hold. And now they have got a river obstacle in front of them where they will dig in, and it'll be easier to defend this territory. They are not, in my view, they are not going to let go of the Donbas region, Zaporizhia and Kherson, because that gives them direct connectivity onto the Crimea. And along with this land connectivity and the Crimea, they have complete control of the Sea of Azov and this portion of the Black Sea. I have a feeling that this is going to be the status quo observed during the winter. But come next summer, situations may change. And if the war doesn't end, I get a sense that Russia will take Odisha also and make Ukraine a landlocked country. So I look at it in a totally different way. I think this is simply a tactical move. It looks bad, perhaps, because they've left a city which they had,
yeah,
and they left it without fighting. But I think they have understood that to fight in a built up area, the number of troops required to hold it will be tremendous. They don't want to take that chance. So they've come back on the other side of the river. And please remember, they have destroyed the bridge which is connecting across Kherson to the other side. So that makes their defensive posture very, very strong. And that is the way I look at it as of now. Zaffar.
Bhuvan Bagga, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash was also mentioning that it could possibly be a deception to suck in the troops from Ukraine and to keep them engaged in this area so as to launch some sort of an attack or a strike in some other area. Could that be a possibility? That's one of the theories that's making rounds.
I mean, for now, everything is just around theories. I generally tend to
Yeah,
agree with what other speakers have said for now, but I'll just make a
yeah,
couple of additional points here. I mean, winter,
yeah,
we're talking about in terms of security and supply lines, but there is
yeah,
another aspect in terms of winters, why Russia, Moscow would want to wait and see what happens in the winters. It's basically the energy supply situation, how different EU capitals react to the energy crunch and the price rise, because when the peak winters come, that also could
yeah,
change a lot of perspective and the way some of the capitals would be more keen to come to the negotiating table or not. Those aspects
yeah,
are also
yeah,
part of the larger calculation. The other
yeah,
aspect is the importance of Kherson. When we talk about it, it's like one of the regions which adds to the Ukrainian breadbasket situation. It has a dam which supplies, I mean, which ensures irrigated supply of water, etc. And in terms of farming and agriculture, it's also very rich there. So it's a major source of grain and vegetables. So those aspects. So to give up Kherson just like that for now, I think it's a supply lines issue. And the other aspect is, of course, everybody wants to wait the winters and see how different capitals react to the energy situation. And also, while you're on the other side in a situation where it's far easier to maintain your troops and to supply them, you could kind of reinforce your positions and prepare for what is to come once the winter goes away and once we are out of winters.
Yes, that's an important point. The winters are very crucial. But could this impact the negotiations or any dialogue process? Uh, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, do you think that this move could have a significant impact on any negotiations which can take place?
Well, it is a seesaw battle, and each side is talking peace but basically waging war. Each side is trying to gain an advantage over the other. Each side wants to deal with from a position of strength. Initially, in the early days and weeks, Russia did not want to negotiate. Today, I would assume that Russia wants to negotiate, but
Yeah,
Ukraine does not, and essentially Washington does not. Because all said and done, the conflict is not between Russia and Ukraine. The conflict
yeah,
is between the major players are Russia, Moscow, and Washington. And
yeah,
what has Washington done? They have pumped in some $60 billion of assistance, humanitarian and defense and military, and the that what has happened is that Russia is bleeding, Ukraine is getting devastated. So Russia, at the moment, it would seem that Washington or the West, so to say, is not in the mood to negotiate. But you do not know how it will pan out. Eventually, they will all have to come to the negotiating table because that's the only way the matter will be hammered out. But when would they do so is anybody's guess because each side needs to either be exhausted or be willing to, one side needs to say, all right, I'll negotiate on the terms of the other. But that day has not come so far.
an important point, Tara Kartha, that Ambassador Vishnu Prakash raised that initially it would have been perhaps Ukraine which wanted to come to the negotiations. They were keen on negotiation, but now it could be Russia. And why would Ukraine start a negotiation process right now when the momentum is going in its favor? The Russian troops have uh, tactically, if one can speak, or maybe strategically also moved out of an area, and Ukraine has again consolidated in that area and regained that.
No, I wouldn't. Again, like I said, occupying Kherson, as the others have said, is
Yeah,
yeah, it's a huge victory. They can talk about it. You want to go forward. Crossing any water body is military hell. I mean, considering the resources which Ukraine has. Think, for
yeah,
example, of the UK crossing the channel and trying to go to Germany and the beating they got. That is a bad
yeah,
military posture, right? It's not something you want
yeah,
to think of.
yeah, yeah,
Nobody is going to, I mean, publicly, he's not going to say that, okay, we are ready to negotiate and let's talk. He has made a public statement that is open to negotiations, and they will put the most maximalist conditions, both sides. You can expect
yeah,
that. They will say you
yeah,
have to do blah blah blah. And remember one thing which people often forget is
yeah,
that Ukraine had a full-fledged rebellion going on in the Donbas region before the Soviet invasion, not necessarily due to Russian assistance. There was a
yeah,
lot of resentment of Zelensky. There were people who hated him. He had shut down the media. He'd done all sorts of things. He was being criticized, by everybody. And his ratings were at the poorest in this area, Donbass area that we are talking of. So right now you have to give both sides. If mediation is going to be true, you have to give both sides a ladder to climb down, but that will be done quietly. So
exactly. And that won't happen so soon. I think winters everybody will be watching carefully. You agree, Major General Dhruv Katoch?
I have on this entire war which has taken place here, I've had a slightly different view. You see,
Yeah,
the way I look at it is the only solution which will actually prevail in the long term is the status quo. Whatever the status quo has been achieved at the time when the ceasefire is declared. They won't really agree to a peace accord. It'll have to really start from a ceasefire. And I think the status quo, which is there when a ceasefire has been called, that will remain the ultimate bargaining tool. I do not see the Russians withdrawing from Donbas, Zaporizhia, or Kherson. If you take a line and you draw a line from Kherson to Zaporizhia, that really follows the line of the Dnipro River. So that gives that entire stretch, the western stretch, it becomes a defensive sort of a sector for the Russians, and then they have to physically defend that area from Zaporizhia to include the Donbas region. That's all. But the lower portion of the region which they have taken has a proper river boundary. Now, that is a great advantage in military terms. As far as Ukraine is concerned, I am afraid they have been taken for a ride by the West. There is nothing which they can do to change the situation. They may get weapons to prolong the war, to prolong the agony, but they will not be able to retake what Russia has taken. That I'm absolutely certain. So we are looking at the status quo. If it remains at the status quo, I think the Ukrainians should be happy in the long term. Otherwise, their agony is going to increase, and the West, especially the United States, is quite happy to fight the Russians to the last Ukrainian. Zaffar.
Well, that's an important point, Bhuvan Bagga, that it's essentially a war between America and the Russia, and that's what is playing out, and perhaps uh, it may not be possible for Ukraine to evict Russia, and US would gladly help and support Ukraine. So this is going to prolong. In this situation, it's Ukraine which is suffering the most. Would you agree, Bhavan Bagga?
And of course, everything is happening in Ukraine. But
Yeah.
in terms of coming to the negotiations, the positions in Ukraine, and also the perspective that Ukraine wouldn't be able to get back some of the territory it lost to Russia in the last 8 months. That all those perspectives have also changed, and especially if you look at the way Russia internally or domestically has talked about some of its goals. It's really not been clear the goals about what the entire operation wants to achieve. They've generally
Yeah.
been vague about they have been vague about it. And also another aspect is that Moscow has generally talked about it right from the start, that it's not a fight against. I mean, initially they talked about the Nazis in the Ukrainian regime, and they
Yeah.
talked about neo-Nazis and all of that. But generally,
Yeah.
since their operations began, they've also always talked about that it's a fight against Washington-backed powers, and it's basically always directed, because it also plays well domestically for the Russian president. And one more point I would want to add here is that in the last 20 years that President Putin has been in power, or has been the top leader in Russia, it's for the first time that he's in this kind of a situation where he has launched or done something big or taken a big step, and that's really not worked out well for him. So in a way, nobody really knows how exactly or how much President Putin would push further, or what exactly he would do now, because it's also a new position for him as a leader who's kind of had a very tight grip, or a very good control over power in Moscow, and generally run things his own way.
Right. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, since the war broke out, it has disrupted supply chain. There has been shortage of fuel and food in many parts of the globe. Do you think those factors would also force the parties to come to a negotiating table in the end?
The big thing which could be a game changer, is energy, and that could be a deciding factor. And I would think that Russia is counting on that, because as winter approaches, Europe is going to have a very tough time. It is easy for countries which have energy resources to say, hang in there, or take a cut, tighten your belt. But people are suffering. Energy prices have shot through the roof, and the supplies are getting disrupted. Now,
Yeah.
people are already on the streets. And while leaders can say what they want to, at the end of the day, in Europe, you have democracies, and if people come out on the streets and oppose the decisions tooth and nail, I think the leaders will find it very difficult. So, energy is going to be a very, very big issue, and that is what Russia is counting on. And that could force the hand of many
Yeah.
capitals, particularly Germany and France, and I don't know about England, but that is food grains is the problem of the developing world, and that will not impact much the decision of the West or Russia when it comes to the issue of conflict or ceasefire.
Tarakanta, you will agree that energy is an important issue in all of this. Energy crisis that many countries are facing, that directly dependent on the war, how long it takes till the war ends.
I think you heard that story about how Russian oil is going to Italy and then being routed back into the United States as legally, because it's not, sanctions regime does not include those oils which are processed elsewhere, because that becomes Italian oil. So this is the kind of way they are getting around these, these sanctions, and then blaming the rest of the world, saying you're supporting Russia, all that kind of thing, right? So sorry, I'm so sorry. One second. So the I agree. Even for us, I mean, look at the. I mean, I was just looking at RBI figures, and it's
Yeah,
pretty. Sorry, it's pretty. It's quite. In the sense, they've done a fantastic job in keeping things, resilient. But we are also paying. We are paying a price for this because of the, look at the current account deficit. Not the balance has sort of literally dropped a lot. Our FDI figures are not that great. The foreign
yeah,
exchange, these things have also dropped. So everybody is suffering from this extremely stupid war. I mean, I'm sorry to say that this is a really stupid war. All Zelensky had to say was, "I'm not joining NATO," and you're done. That's it. And nobody was going to let him join NATO. It was never going to happen. They're not letting him join EU. Forget about NATO,
right,
because his human rights record was bad. And so,
right.
literally, yeah, please.
Yes, obviously those are questions that are being asked. That it's not clear what was the goal of Russia in the first place, and the way the Ukraine responded. That was also very unusual for some. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, I would want to ask you that Putin is to skip the G20 summit in Bali in November. He may join virtually. Do you think this is to save from the embarrassment that this war has, is continuing for so long, and now Russia has withdrawn from one of the key areas?
Well, I think this is one of the smart decisions that has been taken by Moscow and President Putin, because going there would have only meant embarrassment. Uh, there was an effort by the West to keep Russia out of the G20 summit. Indonesia put its foot down, but Mr. Putin going there and getting embarrassed, and the visuals of that to be carried all around, would have made a sad spectacle. Still, it is not sure whether he will address the summit virtually or not. That is in the realm of speculation. Also, while the situation is so difficult, for Mr. Putin to leave the country would have been that much more difficult. So yes, I think it is given the circumstances, Mr. Putin abstaining himself is something that will save him of blushes.
Implications on India. Of course, this war has had implications for entire world. But Major General Dhruv, there are definite implications for India as well. We saw it started with the students, Indian students, which had to be evacuated from the war-torn areas, brought back to India, and now there is this issue of oil. India keeps on, buying oil from Russia. Uh, and that has the volume has increased considerably. Do you think that it has definite implications for India as well?
Most certainly. You see, while this is a European war with European concerns, the
Yeah,
impact has been worldwide, basically because of energy. So, if you are
yeah,
taking the energy equation out of it, well, they could have continued fighting for as long as they wanted and wouldn't have really impacted us. But that is not the case now. There is an energy crisis, and
yeah,
India is impacted. Now, getting
yeah,
those students back and all that, that was a relatively small effort compared to what we are
yeah,
facing now. But energy is
yeah.
something which everybody is looking at. And I feel that the major impact is really going to be on the Western capitals. And when they start feeling the pinch greater and greater in the coming winter,
Yeah.
I think they will have to force the US to tell them, listen, this much and no more, and come to the negotiating table. It is not sustainable.
Yeah.
While there may also be a food shortage in the offing, most of the countries affected in the food shortage will be in Africa, and
Yeah.
I don't think the West will be too concerned about that. But they will certainly be concerned about the energy shortage in Europe. As far as India is concerned, I think we have handled the situation, considering all the circumstances, reasonably well, because this has come. Remember, just after the COVID outbreak was, we had eased all the restrictions, and the economy has started bouncing back. And now, with the economy bouncing back, we have this war on somebody else's war, for which we also have to foot the bill. I think, in the interest of everybody, I totally agree with Tara Kartha. It is a stupid war. I mean, there's no other way to put it. They shouldn't have gone into war. But now that they have gone into war, I think it is in everybody's interest that you stop it now. Have a ceasefire. But I will maintain my original statement, which I started the show. I'm afraid it is the status quo which is going to maintain. I don't see any other way in which you can have a long-term peace. Zaffar.
Right. Tarakata, do you think that India would be able to maintain that balancing act? India has strongly defended its decision of buying oil from Russia, but do you think that it would be able to sustain it, that balancing act? Of course, uh, America, US has said that it's okay for India to buy oil, but do you think that India would be able to manage that balancing act?
I don't think we have a choice. I mean,
Yeah,
considering, during the time when we used to say Russia is our, a strong strategic partner, your trade
yeah,
figure was 8.9 billion USD. Now it is
yeah,
18 billion.
yeah,
That is primarily due to oil. You can't walk away from that. That is the
yeah,
reality. Second is, now I think we've increasingly started also using this, I think so, that Siberian oil, Siberian crude has started coming. It's a shorter distance that is coming into private firms, of course. And we, at this moment in the economic situation, we absolutely have no other choice. And I think it's time the US sort of realized it, that you're skipping sanctions, you're sort of rerouting, doing your own thing to save your economy. I accept that the US will do what's best for its interests, but so do they need to accept that we'll do what's best for our interests. Having said that, however, I mean, you cannot excuse Russia's invasion, right? That is something which is simply not on. So I'm hoping that we can use our good offices at some point to tell them very quietly to not, they will not push back. I completely agree with Ms. General Katoch. They are not going to pull back, but at least freeze the war and let's start talking about talks. At least that we should be able to start.
Bhuvan Bagga, India will do what's in its interest. Indian Foreign Minister has said that. Uh, of course, it's a war that's happening in a different part of the world. India has implications, but India has a large population, and it will do what is in the interest of its own population.
To disagree with the statement that even in action India has shown that
Yeah,
ultimately we have moved the needle when it comes to our comments about Russia, from initially not
yeah,
commenting at all to then talking about this is not the time for war, and then also with Foreign Minister Jaishankar in Moscow talking about, we talked about, apprised about or discussing what's the current situation, what's happening in the relationship, and the concerns about, as we talked about, 18 billion dollars in oil imports, concern about one-sided trade, one-sided lopsided trade. All those concerns have come up, but while we talk about all of that, we move the needle in terms of how we see everything is happening. India cannot survive without cheap oil. Indian economy cannot survive without cheap oil, and the number of people who would suffer if India were to not do that on ground in this country would be significantly more and larger, and it would be another humanitarian crisis altogether. So yes, India will continue doing that, but while India keeps doing that, even for India, I think this would be a winter of wait. I mean, India will wait and watch how European capitals react after this winter, because they would hope that the situation there, or the views there in some of the key capitals, change after this particular winter, and some of them are more keen to come back to the negotiating table, because that would also serve India's interest well. And the concerns about Russia now kind of cornered, and with only China in its corner, or only relying on China, will also weigh in most or many decisions that India takes, because India wouldn't want that situation, especially since it has a very long border with China, where you've had different situations.
right. Tara Kartha, you want to quickly come in before I go to Vishnu Prakash for a last word.
Yeah, just a very quick comment. I think we are all going to suffer in the next 6 months. It's not going to be
Right.
it's not good. I mean, it's not just rising prices. The markets are going crazy. It's a very, very dangerous situation unless this thing stops. That's why I said India should, for its own interest, not anything else, try and stop this war. That's all.
Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, can India stop this war? At least India can wait and watch and do the balancing act, or can it do that?
Well, the ball lies in the court of Washington and Moscow, and India has been encouraging all sides to come to the negotiating table, but they would come when they want to come to the negotiating table. I just want to make two brief observations.
Yeah.
What we are seeing at the moment is a very dangerous kind of a stalemate because Russia simply cannot lose. By Russia, I mean Putin cannot afford to lose because that is the
Yeah.
end of the political demise of President Putin, and Ukraine cannot win. So, in the meantime, each side is trying to damage the other, and unfortunately, sleepwalking into an escalatory mode because the way things are going, I'm very afraid that we could see a major escalation, which the world will come to rue. But I mean, human beings are the only species that refuse to learn from past mistakes, and history tends to repeat itself. I'm sorry to end on this somber note, but that is how I see it.
Well, that's indeed a somber note. Bhuvan Bagga, you want to come in?
Good point.
Yes.
I think in all of this, when we're talking about Moscow and Washington, one key capital we should also mention here is Beijing. And basically, given how the Chinese closeness or Chinese influence on Moscow now or increasing influence, one aspect is that. Another, of course, China has been under lockdown of various kinds, and the economy hasn't really been doing the way it was performing before the pandemic. So as Chinese economy opens up, the demand for energy and oil will also go up. So that will also play a key role. So I think Beijing, one way or the other, will be an important factor in this how this entire conflict plays out.
Yes, China is an important factor, but one would hope that the war ends. It has implications for entire world and for India as well. That brings us to the end of our discussion. Thanks to all our panelists for joining us today. That's all we have on today's show. Thanks for watching.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.